Welcome to Casting Light, everyone. I'm Jayla Mamadova, and I have the pleasure today to be hosting Noha Snyder. Noha is a social entrepreneur and brand builder. She holds an MBA from Columbia Business School and started her career in brand management at Unilever for consumer staples such as Ragu and Lipton. She founded Peel Snacks, an organic food company, in 2004. She's now the founder and CEO of Gathering Us, whose mission is to bring together families and friends to support each other and celebrate the life of their loved ones. Noha, you are an investor and a founder of two businesses. I just mentioned it, and that's just amazing. Your career trajectory is so inspiring. So just in starting off, I would like to talk about the path of an investor and a founder, and you've obviously been very successful. So how have you navigated the business landscape and spotting the right opportunities?
Wow, that's a big question. um, it's interesting. When I started Gathering Us in 2018, I often thought about my previous trajectory in starting Peeled Snacks in 2004, in that I feel like the industries are very similar. The natural food industry, when I was starting Peeled Snacks, was very early. It wasn't established. There were a lot of the old large food companies out there, and it was really hard to get a foot in the door as a new up and coming food entrepreneur. Obviously today that's very different. There are tons of small food companies. There is a very developed organic and natural food scene, and lots of people really understand the difference and how things have evolved. And I feel very similarly about the end of life industry, in that it's this old established industry where things have been done the same way for a very long time, and we're not really meeting the needs that people have. And so now there are a whole bunch of new companies and startups in the end of life industry that are trying to change that and creating real solutions that help people uh, through something that is incredibly challenging, right? One of the most difficult things that we go through in life is losing a loved one. And so there are now a whole slew of different companies, and I'm very lucky to have a bunch of friends in the space that are all building this together. We have a Slack group with 70 members on it. We're starting to have, there's a couple of annual events, one with Reimagine, another one's called Endwell. And it's really exciting that there are so many people coming into this space and really trying to find solutions to help people through this process.
No, that's remarkable that you say that there are actually similarities. And when you come to think of it, yeah, they're two relatively for their time. And at the time, I think when you were launching Peeled Snacks, it was a new industry. So when you're thinking about navigating the different preferences and the consumer in the same way for Gathering Us, what do you think are some of the challenges in that space? And talking about new startups and new companies entering this area, what would you say is different about Gathering Us, or what would be unique in the solution that you are offering?
Yeah, and that changes, right? Consumer needs and what people are looking for changes all the time. With Peeled Snacks, I remember when we started, we wrote on the bag, "No added sugar," and everybody said, "But it's sweet mango. Obviously, it's sugary." And we're like, "Yeah, but there's a difference between added sugar." But people didn't really understand. Eventually, they understood. So first, we had to take it back off the bag, and then we put it back on. And with Gathering Us, I feel there's some similarities, only it's happening much more quickly. So in 2018, when we started, originally Gathering Us was an online memorial space where family and friends could share photos and memories and stories. They could add all the various events and make donations, either for the family for charity or for charity for a nonprofit. Um, and in this year, we started evolving to add to that virtual funerals and virtual ceremonies and receptions. And when we first started working on that, it was something that we'd been talking about for over a year because of my personal experience in being far away from family during an event, or having family that couldn't make it and friends that couldn't make it to an event, and realizing that there's almost always people who are far away and aren't able to attend, but want to be there and want to be supportive. And so for over a year, we wanted to add a virtual events component. And with COVID and social distancing, we realized it was really imperative now. And so we started working on the events in February, and we started calling funeral homes and clergy and synagogues and churches. And the initial response was, that sounds really out of the box. I don't know about that. And then, a couple of weeks later, when the government started saying, you need to stay home, we started getting calls back. And at first there was a lot of questions. And then people said, at first we were getting, what's Zoom? And then eventually that changed, right? Now people know what Zoom is. And the questions are much more evolved. It's more about, well, how are you helping? And what does Gathering Us do? And we're able to explain in much more depth how we help people plan, and we hold their hand through that entire process where it's so difficult and there's so many decisions to make and lots of stakeholders and lots of family and friends, all who want to say something or do something and have opinions. And so we bring all of that together and we help people create truly personal and meaningful events, and help them translate what might have been initially in person into something that today might have some people in person, right? You might have 20 people in person and everybody else is coming in virtually. And so even that, it's changing from just a virtual event to a hybrid event, to something that has people both in person and virtually. And what's fascinating about starting this services during this time is how quickly everything is changing, right? And you see this in the news and with COVID and everything all the time. The world and what people expect and what they understand is changing very rapidly. And so we are also having to adapt on a weekly basis, if not faster, to how do we communicate to people what we do? How do we help them with the new challenges that they have? Sometimes people are thinking, oh, well, we'll wait until things change or until things open up. And then a week later, they're like, oh, no, it's not going to open up. So we're going to do it. But it's going to look different than what we thought it was going to look like. And so helping them with all of that and everything that they're going through, which, losing a loved one is hard enough during regular times. Never mind during a pandemic when you can't get close to people and you can't be there in person to hug them. And so really giving them ways to get through that and to help them and to create something that what we found is at times even more meaningful than what you would do traditionally. There's in a traditional funeral, most people are sitting in rows. And so most of what you see is people's backs, versus in a virtual funeral, you really see everybody up close and you see their face. So it's actually, it feels much more connected in a lot of ways. And it also empowers people. It can be kind of liberating, because oftentimes when it comes to a funeral, people think they're supposed to do the things the way they've always been done and stick with tradition. And they're scared to do something different. But because they can no longer do right now what the traditional ceremony would have looked like, they're forced to think about what is actually meaningful for them. And so we've seen incredible things done. We had one a couple weeks ago where they said, oh, well, this person loved ice cream and fireworks. And so we finished the event with everyone, all the guests eating ice cream and 5 minutes of fireworks on the screen. And it was something that was just so personal and meaningful and lovely and inspiring. And you would have never done in a real event.
So Noah, do you think this is going to be the new way of commemorating and getting together and just sharing the memory of a loved one? Do you think this is going to be the new normal post the pandemic, and whenever we enter the phase of normalization, which almost seems like never right now? But do you think COVID just basically expedited the way that people approach or think about commemorating the loss of a loved one?
For sure. I think the hybrid model where you have some people in person and some people virtually is definitely where things are going. Already before COVID, a lot of people were live streaming a funeral. And that's nice because then, for instance, a friend of mine who passed away 5 years ago, we had 800 people in person at the funeral, and then 2,000 people watched it on live stream, right? So more than double the amount of people couldn't be there in person. And that was great. The difference between a live stream funeral and one a Gathering Us funeral is that ours is interactive and two-way, right? And so it's not just the people at the funeral streaming it out to the public, but it's all the people, all the guests really showing up and being seen. And that's really important for the family because so much of the grieving process and the rituals and the ceremonies that we do are about reflecting back to the mourners what you're going through, having that community show up and reflect back to you the enormity of what you're going through and the significance of it, and really being there for you to feel uplifted by them and supported by them, right? That's the most important piece. And so live stream's okay, it's better than nothing, but having something that is truly interactive and enables all the guests to come together, to participate, to be able to share. So not just having the ceremony part, but all of the guests being able to raise their hand and saying, I have a story to share about this person. And then we also do receptions after the ceremony where we have people go into different rooms. So Joey's room, Samantha's room, the kids' room, and they can all gather and talk in smaller groups and have more interactive conversation as well.
So Noah, you started Gathering Us in 2018, correct? And so in a way you were kind of ahead of the game, right? So
Yeah.
if you could share with us what inspired you and what the process was like in finding Gathering Us, what that process was like, what the challenges were, and again how you were able to see that gap in the market early on.
Yeah. So Gathering Us came out of my personal experience. We have, my husband has a very large Irish family. And when you have a lot of people, you also have a lot of death. So over the last 20 years, we organized about a dozen funerals, and we're very up close and personal with the experience. And we realized that the thing that got us through it is the support of our friends and family, all the people who showed up and were there for us. And we also realized that a lot of people wanted to do something, but they didn't know exactly what to do or how to be there for us. So I wanted to create a space to really enable people to come together, and for the organizer to say, this is what I need, this is when the events are, this is where you can donate to, here is where you can share stories so that we have them. So I wanted to create that space to bring everyone together. And I knew that that was the beginning. There are so many things that you need during the time immediately after a loss and also for time after. And so there are a lot more services and products and things that we can continue to help people with. And this is still very much the beginning. But to your point, I started early, and most of the funeral homes are run very conservatively and very traditional. The most of the industry is still very much in a very different place, but it is changing, and it was starting to change pretty actively even before COVID. And partly because people are less religious, they're more geographically dispersed, so they don't have their families right there. More than 50% of Americans are now being cremated. And that also changes things very dramatically. There's often no burial. They don't really need the funeral home, but they still want to do a memorial ceremony and they still want to come together. And they may not have a clergy member to be a part of that or a religious tradition to follow. And so they're trying to figure out, what does a modern day memorial tribute look like? And our vision was to help them with that.
Now, just quickly going back to Peeled Snacks, you were able to raise 20 million in equity financing. You grew and ran that business for 13 years. So what would you say were the lessons learned out of that experience that you were leveraging into growing Gathering Us?
Yeah, the biggest lesson, I would say, I had come out of business school where I was taught 3 to 5 years, you build a $10 million business, you sell it, you move on. And it didn't happen that way. But I went into it definitely thinking very short term. And I tend to be pretty impatient anyway. And so I was always in a rush to get there and always felt like I was behind the 8 ball. And so the biggest insight for me is just recognizing that things always take much longer and much more time and money than you think they'll take. And if you set your sights on a much longer horizon, it's a lot easier to ride the waves and all the ups and downs that come with starting a business. Um, Nothing great is built overnight, or very few great things are built overnight. So for something that really is adding value and lasts and can grow over time, it takes a lot of time and effort, and you don't get it right, from the beginning. We've certainly pivoted many times with Gathering Us, and one nice thing about starting a business that doesn't have inventory, like a food business, with a business that's mostly online, you can pivot a lot. You can do a ton of trial and error, and you have data that you can test things with, and you can see very quickly what people are doing and how they respond to what you're doing. And that really makes a huge difference. The other thing is, we had actually started fundraising before COVID hit, for Gathering Us. And when COVID hit, everything was on hold. Nobody was making investments. And it was right when we were starting to focus on the funeral services. And it's interesting because now we have a business that is growing, and that is pretty much scaling as a service business, which is very different than Peeled Snacks. It's a consumer business, it's product, it's very inventory intensive. And so now we have the ability to think about the business very differently and to grow it without investor money. And so that changes a lot about the decisions we make, the timelines that we set, and also our ability to continue to pivot and to make those decisions internally with our management team.
Now, what would you say to new entrepreneurs, or or individuals that would like to be entrepreneurs in this era of the pandemic? We're hearing kind of two streams of thought. One is what you make of yourself during the pandemic is going to be a good indication of your life post pandemic, and there are others that are saying maybe to put a pause on it. So what would you say, or what would be your advice in terms of spotting the right opportunities during this relatively challenging time?
Yeah, I think there's so much need, right? There's so many opportunities to build all sorts of things that are going to help people. And some of the best businesses are definitely built when crises happen. So there's definitely plenty of opportunity to build a business, and to solve problems for so many people in society. At the same time, it's a really challenging time. Just, unless you're independently wealthy, it's a really challenging time just to stay afloat right now, and just to survive as a regular human. And I do think that fundraising will be more challenging in this coming phase. So if you can do it, and you can do it without money, obviously, that's ideal. And I do think we need to think really creatively right now about how we help people, what types of businesses we're starting. It's changed, even with Gathering Us, it changes so much every week, right? Even like we keep having to update the website because people's understanding of what we're doing is changing on a weekly basis. And so you have to be on your toes and willing to flex and twist and turn very fast. And then in addition to that, the people that you work with on your team, you have to be really aware that everybody's under stress and everybody's going through a lot. For us with Gathering Us, not only is our team, everyone has their own lives, their own issues, right? So many stressors right now, in addition to the fact that they're working on a topic that is really hard, right? Every day they're talking to people about something incredibly challenging and emotional. And so we try to make sure that we are supporting our team as much as possible. We have a Slack channel called Staying Healthy, where we post about mental and physical ways to stay healthy through the pandemic. And it's incredibly important. And it's one of the key factors that will make or break our success over time, because everybody in the world right now is going through something hard and is up against something hard, and seeing so much pain and suffering around us is really a lot.
No, you said the understanding of the demand has been changing, and therefore you've had to change the website and update it. Could you give examples of that as to how the perception of what Gathering Us is doing and the products it's offering and services offering, how has that changed?
Yeah,
How
so yeah, for sure. So at the beginning, for instance, we wrote on the website, due to coronavirus, people are social distancing. And then, the next week we took off social distancing. The next week we took off coronavirus because that's a given now, right? Like every week, first, people didn't know or why, and right. And so over time, we just that's and understood. Another thing we're evolving to now is really explaining to people what our hybrid events look like. Because it's no longer just a virtual event, it's really layering on the virtual piece to an event, and we can help people with all pieces of that, right? We can help them find a clergy member or a celebrant, we can help them find a musician or a singer. We can do the audiovisual and the tech setup in the location to make sure that everybody, 20 people in the location, can see on the projector, and yet they're also able to get the input and output with Zoom, with everybody who's at home. And so we're doing all of the various pieces in addition to helping them plan and think about what a meaningful ceremony would be for them, and then bringing together the in-person and the virtual into something that works together. And so that's something that we're now evolving, our messaging to really explain the hybrid piece, which was not something that people were doing 3 months ago.
and they're doing that more and more so now. And also for the hybrid piece, especially for the physical element of it, does that require a lot of manpower and physical presence, or how are you coordinating that element along with the virtual piece? And have you experienced any challenges with the pandemic in terms of facilitating the physical presence and the planning that needs to happen in real time?
Yeah, so that is very much changing, partly because, in March, there wasn't a lot of information about indoor versus outdoor versus how many people you can get together, right? So in April in New York, nobody was getting together, whereas in July, right now, people are actually gathering, but keeping it to 10 to 20 people, right? So they're changing. 20 people is different, right? You're going to need more of an audiovisual setup. So in regards to the audiovisual, we actually are able to work with, we don't need any additional equipment. We can have people just do it with their laptops or phones. But if they are in a location that has a projector or a large screen and they have more people, then we're able to work with them, and we can do it all virtually. We don't need anyone in person. We can actually just lead the people through it. Whether it's individuals or the funeral home or clergy, we can actually just talk them through it. And we've done a lot of different types of events, and each location is different. So we have a lot of experience in troubleshooting and working out all of that.
No, that's really amazing, and I guess that's the advantage of starting early on, right? Because you've tried what works and doesn't work, and that's it seems like that's giving you the flexibility in terms of adapting to the needs and of the specific, I guess, of the specific customers. But
Yeah.
no, just slightly pivoting, you are also an investor, and I know you're part of Chloe Capital, and so you're very much vested in female-led entrepreneurship. So slightly changing topic, but I also wanted to ask you as to what is your criteria in investing, and what are some of the mistakes that you're seeing young entrepreneurs making, and what would be your advice in that regard?
Yeah. So yeah, Chloe Capital is one of my favorite investments, because they invest in early stage female founded enterprises. And they do just amazing work with them, and they really support them. They make incredible connections. They're some of the most connected people I know who truly value and leverage those networks. So they're amazing. Um, I'm not making a lot of individual investments right now, partly because I'm focusing on Gathering Us. Um, the thing about fundraising, is that it's a slog. It's always a slog. Um, it's also definitely harder if there's no men on your team. And, obviously that's all proven by the data. And it's so much of it is it's a sales process. If you think of it as a sales funnel, right? You go out there, you pitch, and a certain percentage of people convert. It just happens to be that if you're an all-women team, it's going to be a lower percentage. And so I think that's really important to know. And if you go into it with that mindset and knowing that you're just going to get a whole lot of rejections, and think of it as these are practice for the next meeting, and not necessarily expecting them to convert and the early ones to convert, that definitely helps.
No, that's interesting that you say that, because we do see a lot of either female only teams, or maybe a little bit of a block in terms of what the team should consist of. But in terms of maybe your previous investments, and when you looked at, again, and as you said, business models change and expectations change, but if there were certain criteria that you would single out, saying that this is what at least is the right path in which a business is going to go into, or some way of, if there was a checkbox of items, what would you say are those when we're thinking about entrepreneurs pitching an idea to investors? What would you say are maybe 3-4 items to be very cognizant of?
I mean, there's so many things that I think obviously an entrepreneur that knows the industry they're going into and has some into that industry, whether it's some connection from a supply chain perspective or a sales perspective, something that gives them a leg up, and a reason why they'll be pulled through it. That is something that makes a big difference. There's another.
Do you find people jumping into, I don't want to say, areas that they don't have experience in, but do you find that being a common mistake, where there's either lack of experience or lack of understanding, and there's just a willingness to jump and start a business or an investment? Do you think that's a common mistake?
I mean, I think as an entrepreneur, if you really knew what you were getting into, you wouldn't do it. And I also think that once you're in it, it almost never works out exactly as you thought it would. And usually the business model that you thought you were building is not the one that you end up with. And that's okay. So I think an important piece is really being able to adapt and be flexible and see what's going on around you and be willing to try and fail, and being able to pick yourself back up and do it again is really important, because so much of being an entrepreneur is trial and error, and it's a lot of errors before you get to things that work. And then when things start to work, you then spend the next phase doing trial and error on how to continue to grow that thing that's working. So it's never done, it's never solved, it's never perfect. The problems only get bigger and more complex. And so being okay with that ongoing challenge is really important.
Is business school important? That's always a question that comes up. Especially as you mentioned, in these times that are so challenging, and there is a struggle in terms of how we allocate our finances. Do you think the networking aspect of business school is one that's crucial and should be thought of as a significant step in an entrepreneur's path?
Yeah. I think business schools are definitely a foundation of our capitalist society. And many of my early investors at Peeled Snacks came from business school, and my connections through people at business school. And if you look at so many of the top investment firms and the top, VC-backed companies, they all had relationships through the top business schools. So I think, in the society that we live in, capital is definitely concentrated in a very few, and they tend to be the people who are attending those business schools.
So short answer, if you can, try to make it to business school at some point. Noah, and just slightly pivoting, I know I want to ask you about next steps for Gathering Us, how you envision maybe adding certain services or products, and what your kind of take is in the next maybe 6 months. What does that consist of, and what is your vision? Understanding that it may change with all the changing demands, but what does that look for Gathering Us?
Yeah. It's funny when you said 6 months, I thought, oh, 6 months, who knows? But actually, what's easier to answer is our long term vision, because I think that very much has remained consistent. And COVID has helped us get closer to it in that we are now helping families organize both virtual and hybrid and in-person events, right? We are becoming that extra layer where we can help families and friends come together in so many different ways. And we've started to build a network of all the various resources that they need. And as people move towards cremation more and are using funeral homes even less, we have the opportunity to step in and do some of the work that they were doing or were trying to do, and truly helping families plan an event, organize an event, and execute an event. And it's similar to the wedding planner for weddings, right? There's all the planning in advance, and then the day of event organizer and coordinator. And so now we are taking on a role like that for funerals, which is really exciting. And it means that we're going to, over time, be able to help families with even more.
No, that's amazing, and I'm really keen on seeing how Gathering Us grows, and it seems like it'll be just as successful as Peeled Snacks. So I want to thank you, Noah, so much for sharing your insights today on all fronts, really, of what it means to be an investor, of finding two companies. I really appreciate it. And to the viewers, if you have follow-up questions, please send them over our way. Maybe we'll facilitate, should Noah have time, a one-on-one live conversation. Thank you so much, Noah.
Thank you, Jalen. It's really nice to be here with you.
Thank you so much.